The morning of October 14th arrived in Canton, Ohio the way difficult days often do, quietly, without warning, dressed up as ordinary. The sky was the color of old dishwater. A thin wind moved through the courthouse parking lot, rattling the dry leaves that had gathered against the curb overnight. People arrived early, clutching coffee cups and manila folders, nodding to each other in the practiced, professional way of people who work inside the machinery of human pain every single day and have learned to keep their faces neutral while doing it. Nobody standing on those courthouse steps that morning knew they were about to witness something they would describe to their grandchildren decades later. Nobody knew a 3-year-old girl was about to change everything. Inside, the building was already alive with the particular energy of a high-stakes hearing. Voices ricocheted off marble floors and high ceilings. A cluster of attorneys debated something in sharp, low tones near the water fountain. A social worker named Donna Cartwright moved through the hallway with the careful urgency of someone carrying something fragile, a stack of folders in one arm, a phone pressed to her ear, her eyes already scanning for the room number she'd been assigned. Family Court, Room 7, the Monroe custody hearing. It had been building for weeks, the kind of case that collected weight as it moved through the system, picking up layers of complexity and heartbreak with every new document filed, every new testimony gathered, every new detail that surfaced from the wreckage of what had happened inside a house on Delwood Avenue on the night of September 21st. Donna reached the end of the corridor and stopped. She looked down at the little girl beside her. Lily Monroe stood completely still, her hand loose inside Donna's, her eyes moving slowly across the length of the hallway ahead of them like she was reading something written there in a language that only she could see. She was 3 years old and small for her age, the kind of small that makes strangers want to hand her things, protect her from wind, shield her from the volume of the world. She wore a yellow cardigan that had been in the lost and found box at the foster placement office, 2 sizes too large, the cuffs folded back twice to free her small hands. On her feet were sneakers with Velcro straps, pale pink, the left one only half fastened. She carried a stuffed rabbit against her chest with both arms, the way children carry things that have become more important than toys. She had not spoken in 23 days. Not a word, not a sound. Not a cry in the night or a murmur at breakfast or any of the small, involuntary vocalizations that children produce constantly, like breathing, like blinking, automatic and unstoppable unless something has gone deeply, terribly wrong. The silence had started on September 21st, sometime between the hours of 9 in the evening and 2 in the morning, when a neighbor's call had brought 3 police cruisers and a Child Protective Services van to the address on Delwood Avenue. What the officers found inside that house had launched this hearing, this case, this morning. What they found had also, in ways the medical reports couldn't fully capture, reached inside a 3-year-old girl and switched off something essential. Pediatricians had examined her. A child psychologist named Dr. Reeves had spent 4 careful sessions trying every approach in her considerable toolkit: play therapy, art therapy, quiet, unstructured time with no pressure and no agenda. A speech pathologist had ruled out any physiological cause. Lily's vocal cords were fine. Her hearing was perfect. Her brain, as far as any scan could show, was entirely healthy. She simply had nothing left to say to the world. Or perhaps more accurately, she had too much, and no safe place to put any of it. Donna had been her foster worker for 19 days. She was experienced, patient, and genuinely good at her job, which meant she had stopped trying to fill Lily's silence and had started simply sitting inside it with her, the way you sit with someone in a hospital room when there are no words equal to the moment. She had learned the rhythms of the child beside her. She knew that Lily liked her eggs scrambled soft and her orange juice in a blue cup. She knew that Lily would watch the window for 20 minutes every morning, tracking something outside that Donna couldn't identify. She knew that Lily never cried, not once, in 19 days, which worried the professionals more than tears would have. They stood together at the mouth of the hallway, and Donna was about to say something gentle and preparatory about what was going to happen this morning, when Lily's hand tightened slightly inside hers. Not from fear, something else. Donna followed the child's gaze. 30 feet ahead, near the tall double doors of Courtroom 7, a man in a deputy's uniform stood with his weight evenly distributed, and his hands relaxed, the posture of someone deeply comfortable in his own stillness. He was broad-shouldered, somewhere in his early 40s, with close-cropped gray at his temples and the particular kind of calm that doesn't come from personality, but from years of learning how to stand inside difficult moments without flinching. Beside him sat a dog. A German shepherd, 4 years old, with a coat the color of midnight and autumn mixed together, deep black across the back fatting to warm brown at the chest and legs. He was large, powerfully built. His vest identified him as K9 Unit, Canton PD. He sat with perfect posture beside his handler, and his eyes, amber, clear, and startlingly intelligent, were already moving toward the end of the hallway. Toward Lily. Deputy Marcus Webb had been stationed at this courthouse for 3 years. He and Rex had worked dozens of hearings together, security sweeps, emotional support assignments, the occasional situation that required both skill sets simultaneously. He knew this building the way he knew his own house. Every corridor, every exit, every room where the lighting made people look guilty even when they weren't. He had seen hundreds of children pass through these hallways. Children who screamed and clung to adults. Children who were eerily composed in ways that broke your heart more than the screaming did. Children who watched everything with exhausted, ancient eyes. He thought he had seen every version of a child in crisis that this building could produce. Then he saw Lily. She was so small. That was the first thing. The yellow cardigan, the half-fastened sneaker, the rabbit held against her chest like a shield or a prayer, he couldn't tell which. She stood at the far end of the hallway and she wasn't crying, wasn't pulling at her foster worker, wasn't doing any of the things that children in these circumstances typically do. She was just looking at Rex. And Rex, without any command, without any signal from Marcus, without any of the trained behavioral cues that years of partnership had established between them, lifted his head and looked directly back at her. Marcus felt it before he understood it, a shift in the air, the particular quality of stillness that descends on a space when something is about to happen that doesn't have a name yet. Rex stood up slowly. Not alert, not the sharp, coiled readiness of a working dog on duty. Something gentler than that. Something that Marcus, in 12 years of partnership with this animal, had never quite seen before. Rex stood up the way you stand up when someone you've been waiting for has finally arrived, with recognition, with quiet certainty, with the unhurried calm of an animal operating entirely from instinct and getting it exactly right. Lily's feet, which had been cemented to the marble floor, took one small step forward. Then another. The hallway, which had been full of sound and movement 30 seconds ago, was suddenly, completely still. Attorneys stopped mid-sentence. The social worker on her phone lowered it from her ear without ending the call. A court clerk who had been crossing the corridor with a stack of files simply stopped walking and stood where she was, holding her files, watching. Nobody interfered. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved to redirect or hurry or manage what was unfolding in front of them. Because there are moments, rare, unrepeatable, impossible to manufacture, when the wisest thing every person in a room can do is absolutely nothing. This was one of those moments. Lily walked toward Rex, slowly, steadily, with the careful deliberateness of someone crossing a bridge they aren't entirely sure will hold. Her eyes never left his, her rabbit pressed tight against her chest, her half-fastened sneaker making a soft, rhythmic scrape against the marble with every step. Rex waited. He didn't move forward to meet her. He didn't sit back down. He just stood there in the middle of that courthouse hallway, in his vest and his dignity, and waited for her to come to him at whatever speed the moment required. When she was close enough, she stopped. They looked at each other, the enormous dog and the tiny girl, and something passed between them that had no legal language, no clinical terminology, no place in any of the documents stacked in the manila folders that lined this hallway. Understanding, simple, complete, and mutual. Lily reached out her hand. And the story that would eventually reach every corner of the country. The story that would change a courthouse, launch a program, save a career, and most importantly, save a child began right there, in that quiet, unremarkable hallway on an ordinary gray Tuesday morning in October. It began with a little girl, a yellow cardigan, and a dog who already knew everything she hadn't yet found the words to say. There is a particular kind of exhaustion that lives in the bodies of people who work with traumatized children. It isn't the exhaustion of long hours or heavy caseloads, though those are real enough. It's something deeper, the specific fatigue that accumulates when you spend your days reaching towards someone who cannot reach back. When you extend every professional tool you possess, every ounce of human warmth you can manufacture, every carefully learned technique from every training seminar you've ever attended, and the child on the other side of the table simply looks at you with eyes that say, clearly and without apology, "I know what you're doing, and I don't trust it." Every person in that courthouse hallway who worked with children carried that exhaustion somewhere in their body that morning. Donna Cartwright carried it in her shoulders. The child psychologist who had been assigned to Lily's case carried it behind her eyes. The family court advocate who had spent 3 weeks trying to build a bridge to this particular little girl carried it in the slight, barely perceptible slump of someone who hasn't admitted defeat but is beginning to understand its shape. They had all tried. That was the truth of it, and it mattered. The trying always matters, but trying had not been enough. Lily Monroe had constructed a wall around herself with the unconscious architectural genius of a traumatized 3-year-old, and every ladder the adults in her life had leaned against it had simply slid back down. Rex didn't bring a ladder. Rex didn't bring anything except himself, his warmth, his stillness, his complete and total absence of agenda, and that, it turned out, was precisely everything. He stood in the middle of the hallway and waited while Lily crossed the distance between them, and when she was close enough that her small, outstretched hand was inches from his nose, he did something that Deputy Marcus Webb would spend the next several years trying to explain to people who asked him about it. Rex bowed. Not a trained behavior, not a command response, not anything in the K-9 curriculum that Marcus had spent years studying and implementing. Rex simply dropped, front legs extending forward, massive chest lowering toward the marble floor, hindquarters staying up slightly so that the gesture looked less like submission and more like an invitation, like a curtsy, like the instinctive physical language of a creature saying, without words, "I am not a threat. I am not above you. I am here at your level, and I am staying." Lily's hand found his nose. Rex exhaled a long, slow breath that moved through his whole body and pressed his nose gently into her palm, not forcefully, not with the eager enthusiasm that dogs often bring to new encounters, gently, carefully, the way you handle something you recognize as breakable. The sound Lily made was almost inaudible. It wasn't a word. It wasn't a name or a cry or anything that could be transcribed into a legal document or a clinical report. It was the sound of something giving way, a single, soft exhale that seemed to come from a place much deeper than her lungs. The sound of a breath held for 23 days finally, tentatively, being released. Her shoulders dropped half an inch. To anyone who hadn't been watching Lily Monroe for the past 3 weeks, half an inch would have meant nothing. To Donna Cartwright, who had spent 19 days observing every microexpression this child produced, it meant everything. She pressed her free hand flat against her sternum without realizing she was doing it, the automatic gesture of someone absorbing something that hits before the mind can process it. Lily sat down on the floor. No one told her to. No one suggested it or guided her toward it. She simply folded herself down onto the cold marble of that courthouse hallway as naturally as if it were a meadow in summer, tucked her stuffed rabbit into her lap, and leaned her small body against Rex's side. Rex lowered himself the rest of the way down beside her. They fit together with the ease of things that were always meant to occupy the same space: the enormous dog and the tiny girl, his dark coat against her yellow cardigan, his steady breathing setting a rhythm that her small body gradually began to follow. In, out, in, out. Slow and even and unhurried, like the world outside that hallway had agreed to pause and wait. Deputy Marcus Webb crouched down slowly, resting his forearms on his knees, watching his partner work in a way he had never quite witnessed before. He had seen Rex perform. He had seen him track, apprehend, search, and alert with the precision of a finely calibrated instrument. He had seen Rex provide comfort at crime scenes, sit with witnesses, offer his warm presence to people in the immediate aftermath of the worst moments of their lives. But this was different. This wasn't Rex responding to a command or executing a trained behavior. This was Rex doing something that existed entirely outside the boundaries of his training, something that could only be described, if you were being fully honest about it, as understanding. As if the dog had looked at this child and read her completely. As if everything Lily couldn't say had been written somewhere in the air around her, in a frequency that human instruments couldn't detect, but Rex received as clearly as a radio signal. Marcus had been partnered with Rex for 4 years. He thought he knew everything the dog was capable of. He was wrong. Around them, the hallway continued its careful stillness. People who had been moving with purpose had slowed and stopped, pulled into the gravitational field of what was happening on the floor between the dog and the child. An attorney named Brian Garrett, who represented the opposing party in the hearing, and who had a reputation for emotional detachment that colleagues described as almost impressive, stood with his leather briefcase hanging from his fingers, and his carefully constructed expression completely dismantled by what he was watching. Nobody spoke. Nobody checked their watches. Nobody gestured toward the courtroom doors where the hearing was supposed to begin in 11 minutes. Because there are things that schedules cannot compete with. Donna Cartwright lowered herself carefully into a crouch a few feet away, close enough to be present, far enough to not intrude. She had worked in child welfare for 14 years, and she had developed, over those 14 years, a reliable sense for the difference between moments that should be managed and moments that should simply be witnessed. This was the second kind. Whatever was happening between Lily and this dog was operating on a frequency that adult intervention would only disrupt, and Donna was experienced enough to know that disrupting it would be a form of damage she couldn't afford. So she stayed quiet and she watched. Lily's hand moved slowly across Rex's coat, not petting exactly, more like reading. Her small fingers moved through the dark fur with the careful attention of someone learning something by touch. She traced the edges of his vest. She found the silver tag on his collar and held it between 2 fingers, examining it with the focused seriousness of a child who has decided that something is important and intends to understand it completely. Rex held perfectly still through all of it. 3 minutes passed, then 5, then 8. And somewhere around the 10-minute mark, something shifted again. The quality of Lily's stillness changed, became less like shock and more like peace. Her breathing, which had been shallow and quick since she arrived at the courthouse that morning, deepened and slowed. The vertical line between her brows, the one that Donna had come to think of as Lily's permanent expression, the mark of a child perpetually braced for the next thing, softened and disappeared. She leaned her head against Rex's shoulder. Her eyes drifted half-closed. And then her lips moved. Marcus Webb, still crouched 3 feet away, saw it before he heard it. He saw the tiny movement of her mouth, the careful, deliberate shape of words being formed by someone who had gone a very long time without forming them, and was testing the mechanism carefully, the way you test a door you aren't sure will open. He leaned forward almost imperceptibly. The words, when they came, were barely there, a breath with shape, a sound so small it existed right at the boundary between silence and language. She wasn't speaking to Donna, wasn't speaking to Marcus, wasn't offering anything to the hallway full of adults who had spent weeks trying to earn exactly this. She was speaking to Rex. Her lips moved against his fur. 3 words, formed with the quiet, certain precision of someone who has chosen their listener with great care and has decided, finally, that this listener can be trusted with the truth. Marcus heard every syllable. He didn't move. He didn't react visibly. He held the information inside his chest with the careful steadiness of a man who understands that what he has just received is not his to respond to yet, that it belongs first to the child who offered it, and then to the courtroom that needed to hear it, and only then to the long, necessary process of making things right. But something had changed in that hallway. Something that had been locked for 23 days had just, quietly and without ceremony, come open. And the dog who had done it sat warm and still and unmoving beside a little girl in a yellow cardigan, breathing slowly, asking nothing, giving everything, exactly the way the best listeners always do. There is a moment in every significant event, before the consequences arrive, before the reactions cascade, before the world reorganizes itself around what has just happened, where time seems to pause and take a breath. Deputy Marcus Webb lived inside that moment for approximately 4 seconds after Lily's lips stopped moving. 4 seconds doesn't sound like much. In the context of a working day, 4 seconds is nothing. The time it takes to sign your name, to pour a cup of coffee, to cross a room. But in the context of what Marcus had just heard, those 4 seconds were enormous. They were the 4 seconds between a match being struck and the flame catching, between a stone leaving a hand and hitting the water, between a truth being spoken and the world being forced to respond to it. He had been crouched 3 feet from Lily and Rex, close enough to hear but far enough to not intrude, when the words came. He had been watching Lily's lips move with the focused attention of a man who had spent 12 years training himself to observe things that other people missed. The small, telling details that existed at the edges of situations, that most people walked past without registering, that turned out later to be the most important details of all. 3 words. Soft as a breath, certain as a confession. He hurt me. Marcus Webb did not move. He did not stand up, did not reach for his radio, did not allow any of the immediate, powerful responses that detonated inside his chest to reach his face or his body. 12 years of training held him in place like an anchor while everything inside him surged. He looked at Lily. She had her face turned back into Rex's fur now, her lips no longer moving, her small hand still resting on the dog's coat. She looked the way people look after they have put something down that they've been carrying for a very long time, lighter somehow, and also more fragile, as if the weight had been structural, and without it, she needed a moment to find her new balance. She had no idea what she had just done. She didn't know that 3 words whispered into a dog's fur in a courthouse hallway could redirect the entire course of a legal proceeding. She didn't know about evidence, about testimony, about the machinery of family court that was waiting behind those tall wooden doors and grinding forward on its schedule regardless of what happened in hallways. She didn't know that adults had been trying to get exactly what she had just offered, without being able to ask for it, for 23 days. She just knew that Rex was warm and solid and safe. And that, for the first time in 23 days, she had told the truth to someone who wouldn't flinch. Marcus straightened up slowly, the careful, deliberate movement of a man managing himself precisely. He exhaled through his nose. He looked down the hallway, then back at Lily, then at Rex, who had not moved a single inch and showed no indication of planning to. Then he looked at his watch, because information has to be processed in some order, and sometimes the mind reaches for the most concrete thing available while it catches up with the most significant thing. It was 8:47 in the morning. The hearing was scheduled to begin at 9. He had 13 minutes. Claire Donovan had been standing approximately 8 feet back, which was close enough to have watched the entire interaction between Lily and Rex, with the focused attention of someone whose professional life had taught her to read situations the way other people read books. Fully, carefully, between the lines as much as on them. She was 44 years old, a child advocacy attorney with 16 years of courtroom experience, and she had developed over those 16 years a particular skill that she considered more valuable than any legal knowledge she possessed. She could read a room by reading the people in it. And she had been reading Marcus Webb for the past several minutes. She had watched his body language shift, the almost imperceptible forward lean, the slight change in his breathing, the way his jaw had tightened for just a fraction of a second before his training smoothed it back to neutral. She had watched his eyes move from Lily to Rex, and back to Lily with a different quality of attention than before. Not the watchful calm of a K-9 officer monitoring a situation, but something sharper. Something that looked from 8 feet away, like a man reorganizing everything he knew around something he had just learned. She crossed the hallway in 6 steps. She didn't ask it as a question. She had learned over 16 years that questions give people an exit. She placed herself in Marcus's direct line of sight and said it as a statement, quietly, with the particular calm of someone who has learned to keep their voice level precisely when their pulse is not. She said something. Marcus looked at her for a moment without speaking. In that moment, in the brief, loaded silence between her statement and his response, Claire understood that whatever Lily had said, it was significant, not the tentative, fragmentary half-communication of a traumatized child beginning to emerge. Something specific, something that had landed in this experienced, steady officer with enough force to require 4 full seconds of internal management before he could respond to it. 3 words, Marcus said. His voice was quiet and even and carried beneath it the controlled weight of something large being held very carefully. He glanced once at Lily, still pressed against Rex, still entirely unaware that she had just changed the direction of her own life, and then back at Claire. And the judge needs to hear them right now. Claire moved. She was through the courtroom doors in 15 seconds, and the sound of those doors opening and closing reached the hallway like a starting gun. Donna Cartwright, still crouched near Lily, looked up. The court aide who had been hovering at the corridor's edge straightened. An attorney near the water fountain turned his head. Something was happening. The hallway could feel it, that particular shift in atmosphere that precedes significant events, when the air itself seems to change pressure. Inside Courtroom 7, Claire Donovan approached the clerk and requested an immediate conference with Judge Hale before proceedings commenced. The clerk looked at the clock, 8 minutes to 9, and then looked at Claire's face and reached for the intercom without further deliberation. In 16 years of working family court, she had learned to distinguish between attorneys who wanted delays for tactical reasons and attorneys who were moving with genuine urgency towards something that mattered. Claire Donovan was moving with genuine urgency. Judge Patricia Hale emerged from her chambers 2 minutes later, her robes not yet fully settled, reading glasses pushed up on her forehead in the way she wore them when she was thinking rather than presiding. She was 61 years old, silver-haired, with the particular stillness of someone who had spent 2 decades absorbing the worst things families do to each other and had come out the other side with her compassion intact, which was, in family court, the equivalent of a combat veteran maintaining their idealism. Remarkable, hard-won, visible in the eyes. She listened to Claire for 90 seconds without interrupting. Then she said, "Get him in here." At 8:56 in the morning, Deputy Marcus Webb walked through the doors of Courtroom 7 with Rex Healing precisely at his left side. The courtroom was full, gallery packed, both legal teams assembled, court reporters ready, the machinery of justice arranged and waiting. Every head turned. Every eye tracked the dog and the man crossing the floor together toward the front of the room. Gerald Prout, seated at the respondent's table in a charcoal gray suit and a burgundy tie, watched them come with an expression that was carefully, professionally composed. He had maintained that composure through weeks of investigation, through the initial removal of Lily from the home, through the filing of the hearing. He was good at composure. He had been practicing it for years. But his right hand, resting on the table, closed into a fist. Just for a moment, just briefly. And then it opened again, slowly, deliberately, as if he had caught himself and corrected the error. Marcus Webb took the stand. Rex settled beside him, amber eyes moving once across the room before going still. Claire Donovan approached. "Deputy Webb," she began, her voice carrying clearly to every corner of the room, "please tell this court, in your own words, exactly what you witnessed in the hallway outside this courtroom this morning." He told them everything. He told them about Lily walking in, about Rex's reaction, the unrequested, untrained, instinctive lowering of himself to the floor, about the minutes of silence, the quality of what happened between the dog and the child, the way Lily's body had changed as she leaned against Rex's side. He spoke with the careful precision of a man who understood that the value of what he was offering depended entirely on its accuracy, that a single embellishment, a single detail colored by emotion rather than observation, could undermine everything. He told them what he had heard. The courtroom, as he spoke, went through a series of silences, each one deeper than the last, each one settling over the room like a new layer of something heavy and significant. By the time he reached the end of his account, the silence was total, complete, the kind of silence that a room full of people produces when every one of them has stopped breathing at the same moment. "She said 3 words," Marcus Webb told the courtroom. His eyes were steady. His voice did not waver. "She said the briefest pause, not from uncertainty but from the instinctive human acknowledgement that some words, once released into the world, cannot be called back. He hurt me." The sound from the gallery was involuntary and immediate, a collective, uncontrolled exhale that passed through the room like a wave. Someone in the second row made a sound that was not quite a sob but was heading there. A court reporter's fingers stopped moving on her keyboard for 3 full seconds before she caught herself. Gerald Pruitt's right hand on the table closed into a fist again. This time it did not open. An attorney shot to his feet. An objection formed in the air, something about hearsay, about the inadmissibility of statements relayed secondhand, about the legal standards that existed precisely to prevent moments like this one from derailing proceedings built on evidence rather than emotion. Judge Patricia Hale raised one hand. A single hand, raised without drama, without raised voice, without any of the theatrical authority that lesser judges reached for in difficult moments. Just one hand, lifted to shoulder height, palm forward. The attorney sat down. The objection dissolved. The room obeyed, not because it had to, but because Judge Hale's authority in that moment was not procedural but moral, and everyone present felt the difference. She held the silence for 5 long seconds, her eyes on Deputy Webb, her expression doing the rapid, invisible work of a mind recalibrating around new information. Then she set down her pen with a quiet, final sound that seemed to echo. "Enter it into the record," she said. "Every word." She looked at Claire Donovan, then at the opposing counsel, then back at the front of the room with the focused, settled expression of a woman who has just watched a case change direction and is already 3 steps ahead of everyone else in the room. "And I want a forensic child psychologist in this courthouse before end of business today." A pause. "We are not moving forward until we do this correctly." She picked up her gavel. And somewhere in the hallway outside, a little girl in a yellow cardigan sat against a warm dog and had no idea that 3 small words had just stopped an entire courtroom cold. There are certain images that burn themselves into memory, not because they are dramatic in the theatrical sense, not because there is shouting or violence or the kind of visible, cinematic intensity that people associate with important moments, but because they contain a quality of truth so concentrated, and so unexpected that the mind simply cannot let them go. The image of Rex walking to the front of Courtroom 7 was one of those. He moved the way he always moved, with the unhurried, deliberate precision of an animal that has never once in its life been in a hurry, and has never needed to be. His nails made a quiet, rhythmic sound against the hardwood floor. His vest sat perfectly across his broad chest. His tail was still, not tucked, not raised, but level, the neutral position of a working dog who is neither threatened nor excited but simply present and fully engaged with the task at hand. Deputy Marcus Webb walked beside him, one hand loose at his side, his dress shoes making a more formal sound against the same floor, a counterpoint, almost musical in its contrast. Man and dog, 12 years of partnership distilled into the simple act of crossing a room together. Every eye in Courtroom 7 followed them. The gallery, packed to capacity with attorneys and social workers and courthouse staff who had found reasons to be present that morning, watched with the particular transfixed attention of people who are witnessing something they cannot quite categorize. They knew dogs. They knew courtrooms. They knew the separate grammars of each space. But a dog in a courtroom, a dog walking calmly to the witness stand as if he had done it 100 times, as if this was simply the next logical location in a purposeful morning, existed outside any grammar they possessed. Rex sat down beside the witness stand the moment Marcus stopped moving. He didn't need to be told. He didn't wait for a command or a hand signal or any of the invisible communications that had developed between man and dog over 4 years of daily partnership. He simply sat squarely, solidly, with the composed authority of someone who understands their role and has no anxiety about fulfilling it. His amber eyes moved once across the room. Not nervously, not with the scanning alertness of a dog in an unfamiliar environment processing potential threats. It was something closer to assessment, the calm, professional survey of a creature that has walked into hundreds of charged human spaces and learned to read them the way experienced people read rooms. He looked at the gallery. He looked at the judge's bench. He looked, briefly and without expression, at the respondent's table where Gerald Prout sat in his charcoal suit. Then he went still. The kind of still that large, powerful animals achieve when they have decided that stillness is what the moment requires, not the stillness of suppression, but of choice, of presence without performance. Judge Patricia Hale watched Rex settle, and then looked at Deputy Webb with an expression that contained, beneath its judicial composure, something that might have been wonder. She had presided over 19 years of family court hearings. She had seen experts and witnesses and evidence of every conceivable variety take their place before her bench. She had never looked down from that bench at a German shepherd sitting beside her witness stand like he belonged there, and felt, as she did now, that he absolutely did. "Deputy Webb," she said, in the clear, measured voice that had guided thousands of proceedings to their conclusions, "you may be seated." Marcus settled into the witness chair. Rex remained beside him, pressed lightly against the wooden side of the stand, warm and immovable, his eyes now forward and still. Claire Donovan approached from the left, her heels making the purposeful sound of someone who has spent 16 years learning to enter spaces like she owns them, because in this particular space, in this particular moment, that quality of ownership was exactly what the situation required. She stopped a respectful distance from the stand. She looked at Marcus Webb for a moment before she spoke, not the calculating look of an attorney measuring a witness, but something more collegial. The look of two professionals who are, together, about to do something important. "Deputy Webb," she began, her voice carrying to every corner of the room without effort, "please tell this court, in your own words, everything you observed from the moment Lily Monroe entered this building this morning." Marcus took a breath. He was not a man who spoke for effect. He was not a man who understood the value of pauses and packing and the theatrical architecture of a compelling narrative. He was a man who understood precision, who had learned over 12 years that the most powerful thing a witness can do is tell exactly what happened in exactly the order it happened, without addition or embellishment, and trust the facts to carry their own weight. So he told them. He started at the beginning, the moment Donna Cartwright had appeared at the end of the hallway with Lily beside her. He described what he had observed: the child's size, her expression, the yellow cardigan, the stuffed rabbit. He described Rex's reaction, pausing here not for effect, but because he wanted to be accurate about something he still didn't entirely have language for. He described it as best he could. The unrequested response, the lowering of Rex's body to the floor, the quality of attention the dog had directed at Lily from the first moment. He described Lily crossing the hallway. He described her sitting down on the floor. He described the 10 minutes of silence, the quality of it, the way it had settled over everyone present, the way Lily's body had gradually changed as Rex's steady presence reached her. He spoke about this carefully, aware that he was moving into territory that was more observation than fact, more impression than evidence, and wanting to be clear about the distinction. The courtroom listened with the focused, collective attention of people who are receiving something important and know it. No one checked their phone. No one shifted in their seat. No one leaned over to whisper to their neighbor. The court reporter's fingers moved steadily across her keys, capturing every word with the mechanical fidelity of a machine that doesn't know it's recording something historic. Then Marcus reached the moment that everyone in the room had been waiting for, since Claire Donovan had walked through those doors 40 minutes ago with urgency written across every line of her face. He paused, not from reluctance, not from uncertainty, but from the instinctive human recognition that some words exist at a threshold, that on one side of them the world is one thing, and on the other side it is something different, and that the act of speaking them aloud is the act of crossing from one to the other with no possibility of return. He looked at Judge Hale. She gave him nothing, no nod, no encouragement, no signal. Just the steady, patient attention of a woman who has been waiting her entire career for exactly this kind of moment and has learned not to rush it. Marcus Webb looked at the courtroom. She said 3 words, he told them. His voice was level, his eyes were clear. Beside him, Rex sat perfectly still, as if he too understood the weight of what was coming and had chosen to anchor it with his presence. In 23 days, Lily Monroe had not spoken a single word to any person in her life. Not to her foster worker, not to her therapist, not to the doctors who examined her. He paused again, one beat clean and deliberate, but she spoke to Rex. She put her face against his fur, and she whispered 3 words that I was close enough to hear clearly. The room had achieved a quality of silence that was almost physical, the kind you could feel against your skin. She said. Marcus Webb's voice did not waver, did not soften, did not reach for any of the emotional modulation that the moment might have forgiven. He hurt me. The sound that moved through the courtroom was involuntary and collective and entirely human. It was not dramatic. It was not loud. It was the sound of a room full of people absorbing something that hits before the mind can prepare a defense against it. A sharp, shared exhale, as if everyone present had been struck simultaneously by something invisible. In the gallery, a woman pressed both hands over her mouth. A social worker in the second row closed her eyes. The court reporter's fingers stopped moving for exactly 3 seconds, an involuntary pause, human and telling, before training reasserted itself and her hands resumed their work. At the respondents' table, Gerald Prout sat with the careful, constructed stillness of a man managing himself under enormous pressure. His face was a performance of composure, measured, controlled, the expression of someone who had spent years learning to present a surface that revealed nothing. But beneath the table, hidden from every eye in the room except possibly Rex's, whose amber gaze had settled on the respondent's table and had not moved since Marcus began speaking, Gerald Prout's right hand pressed flat against his thigh with the rigid, whitening pressure of a man holding himself together by force of will. The opposing attorney rose. He was good, experienced, sharp, the kind of legal professional who could construct an objection in the time it takes most people to register that one is needed. He was on his feet before the echo of Marcus Webb's words had fully settled, his voice deploying the language of procedural challenge with practiced precision. Hearsay, admissibility, the standards of evidence that existed to protect the integrity of proceedings from exactly this kind of moment, from the emotional power of a compelling account overriding the careful structures of legal process. He made valid points. In a different courtroom on a different day, with a different judge, those points might have landed differently. Judge Patricia Hale raised her hand. One hand shoulder height, palm forward. The attorney's voice stopped as if a switch had been thrown. She held the silence for a count of 5, not impatiently, not dramatically, but with the absolute authority of someone who has earned the right to silence a room and uses that right only when necessary. Her eyes moved from the attorney to Marcus Webb to the space in the middle of the room where the words still seemed to hang in the air like smoke. Then she reached for her pen. "The statement will be entered into the record in its entirety," she said. Her voice was measured and final, the voice of a decision being made in real time, fully, without reservation. She looked at the court reporter. Every word exactly as given. She looked at Claire Donovan. "I want a forensic child psychologist in this building before 4 o'clock this afternoon." She looked, finally, at the full room, at the attorneys and the gallery and the machinery of justice assembled before her, with the expression of a woman who has just watched a case reveal its true shape and is already moving toward what needs to happen next. "We are not proceeding," she said, "until we do this right." She set her pen down. The sound it made against the bench was small and quiet and entirely final. And beside the witness stand, Rex sat warm and still and unmoving, his amber eyes steady, his breathing even, his whole powerful body radiating the calm of a creature who had done what he came to do and was content, now, simply to be present while the humans around him caught up. The room on the second floor of the Stark County Courthouse had been used for many things over the years. Storage, mostly, then briefly as an overflow office for the clerk's department during a renovation. Then, when a child welfare grant had come through 3 years prior, it had been quietly converted into what the building's directory listed as a child advocacy suite, a name that sounded more impressive than the reality, which was a medium-sized room with cream-colored walls, low furniture selected from a catalog designed for pediatric waiting rooms, a narrow window that looked out onto the courthouse parking lot, and a box of art supplies in the corner that sat largely untouched because most children who came to this room were not in a condition to make art. It was not a beautiful room. It was not warm in the way that carefully designed therapeutic spaces can be warm. But it was quiet, and it was removed from the institutional energy of the floors below. And on the afternoon that Dr. Sandra Acaffer walked into it for the first time and stood in the middle of it, assessing its suitability for what Judge Hale had asked her to do, she decided that quiet and removed were enough. They would have to be. Dr. Acaffer was 53 years old, with close-cropped natural hair going silver at the temples and the kind of face that had been described, over 22 years of professional life, as both reassuring and unreadable, which was, in her field, the ideal combination. She had conducted forensic interviews with children in settings ranging from hospital trauma wards to temporary shelters to the backseats of Child Protective Services vehicles when no better option existed. She had learned, over those 22 years, to bring the environment she needed with her, rather than waiting for the environment to be provided. She set her bag on the low table. She removed a notepad, a specific brand of pen she had used for 15 years, and a small brown bear that lived permanently in her bag and had, over the course of its career, done more therapeutic work than most credentialed professionals she knew. Then she looked at Deputy Marcus Webb, who was standing in the doorway holding Rex's lead. "Can the dog stay?" she asked. It was the only question she asked before the sessions began. Marcus looked at her for a moment, assessing, as he always did, before committing to anything, and then nodded once. "Rex goes where Lily needs him," he said, which was not standard protocol and both of them knew it, but protocol exists to serve outcomes, and the outcome here was clear enough that the protocol could flex. The first session was scheduled for 3 o'clock on a Thursday afternoon, 2 days after Marcus Webb's testimony had stopped Courtroom 7 cold. Lily arrived holding her stuffed rabbit in one arm and Donna Cartwright's hand in the other. She was wearing a green sweatshirt and gray leggings and her pink Velcro sneakers, the left one still imperfectly fastened, which Donna had stopped correcting because she had come to understand that some things are not about capability and not about stubbornness, but about the small, private ways that children in crisis maintain control over a world that has taken most of their control away. She walked into the room and stopped. Her eyes found Rex immediately. He was already there, settled on the floor near the low table, his vest on, his expression carrying the particular quality of patient readiness that was simply his permanent state of being. He looked at Lily the way he had looked at her in the hallway 2 days prior, with recognition, with stillness, with the unhurried certainty of a creature who has decided that this person matters and has no intention of changing that decision. Something in Lily's posture shifted, fractionally, imperceptibly perhaps to anyone who hadn't been studying her for weeks. But Dr. Ackefer noticed it. She noticed everything. It was her job, and she was extraordinary at her job. She introduced herself to Lily in the quiet, unhurried way she had developed over 2 decades, not crouching down to child level in the way that adults sometimes do, which can feel to a perceptive child like a performance of approachability rather than the real thing, but simply sitting on the low sofa and occupying space in a way that made no demands and issued no invitations. She was simply there, present and available and entirely without agenda. Lily looked at her for approximately 4 seconds. Then she walked to Rex and sat down beside him on the floor. Dr. Ackefer wrote one line in her notepad. Then she put the pen down and let the session be what it needed to be. For 11 minutes, Lily said nothing. She sat against Rex's side the way she had in the hallway, leaning into his warmth, her fingers moving slowly through his coat, her rabbit tucked into her lap. She examined his vest again with the careful attention she had given it before. She found his collar tag and held it. She traced the line of his jaw with one finger, very gently, as if she was memorizing the architecture of something she was afraid might disappear. Rex was a statue, a warm, breathing statue that smelled of dog and leather and something indefinably safe. After 11 minutes, Dr. Ackefer said, very quietly and without looking directly at Lily, "Rex likes it here." A statement, not a question, not an invitation, just a small, neutral observation dropped into the silence like a pebble into still water to see what ripples it produced. Lily looked up at Rex's face. "He's good," she said. 2 words, barely audible, spoken to the dog rather than to the doctor, which was fine, which was, in fact, exactly right. Dr. Ackefer wrote them down without reacting, without looking up, without doing anything that might make Lily aware that what she had just produced was significant. The first session ended at 3:22. 11 minutes of silence and 2 words. To anyone observing without context, it would have looked like almost nothing. To Dr. Sandra Ackefer, who had spent 22 years learning to measure progress in units that most people couldn't see, it looked like a door that had been sealed for a very long time developing, at its edge, the faintest line of light. The second session happened 2 days later. Lily arrived faster this time. There was less hesitation at the doorway, less of the careful environmental scanning that had characterized her first entrance. She went directly to Rex, sat down, leaned against him, and was still for 6 minutes before she began to talk. She asked Rex a question. It came out carefully, 3 words, formed with the deliberate precision of someone who has been holding them for a long time and has finally decided the risk of releasing them is worth taking. Are you safe? The question landed in the room with a weight entirely disproportionate to its size. Dr. Acaffer, on the sofa across the room, felt it in her chest, the specific, shattering quality of a child's question that reveals, in its asking, the entire landscape of what that child has been living inside. Rex rested his chin on Lily's knee. Lily looked at him for a long moment. Then she nodded, slow and serious, the nod of someone making a decision based on evidence rather than hope. "Okay," she said quietly, "okay." Dr. Acaffer wrote it all down. Her handwriting was small and precise, and she filled half a page in the 34 minutes of the second session, which was 3 times what she had written in the first. Progress in this work rarely arrives in dramatic leaps. It arrives in increments, a word here, a question there, a nod that contains an entire history. The third session was different. Lily arrived without hesitation. She walked directly to Rex, sat down, and was silent for exactly 90 seconds. The silence not of retreat but of preparation, the quiet of someone gathering themselves before beginning something they have decided to do. Then she started talking. Not to Dr. Acaffer, not to Deputy Marcus Webb, who sat in his corner so still and quiet that he had become, over 3 sessions, essentially part of the room's furniture. She talked to Rex, in the fragmented, circling, doubling back way that 3-year-olds speak, mixing tenses, losing words mid-sentence and finding them again, starting stories from the middle and working outward in both directions simultaneously. But she talked. She talked about a lamp, a specific lamp in a specific room that had been broken for a long time and never replaced, just left there on its side with the shade bent. She talked about stairs, the particular sound they made at night, a creak on the 3rd step that she had learned to listen for the way children learn to listen for things that matter to their safety. She talked about a smell, something she didn't have a word for, something she described as the bad smell that comes before what she didn't finish, but Dr. Acaffer's pen moved faster. She talked about a man whose voice changed. She described it the way a child describes something they have observed many times and processed with the careful, empirical attention of a small person trying to understand the rules of their environment. His voice in the daytime was one thing. His voice at night, after certain sounds from certain rooms, was another thing entirely. She knew the difference between the voices the way she knew the difference between safe stairs and the 3rd step. She had learned both lessons the same way. Rex stayed pressed against her for the entire 21 minutes that she talked. He didn't shift. He didn't shake her off when her grip on his coat tightened, and it did tighten, several times at specific moments in the telling, the way a hand tightens on something solid when memory gets rough. He absorbed it all, the words and the grip and the weight of what she was releasing, with the steady, unconditional presence of a creature for whom being there completely is not an effort but simply a nature. Dr. Sandra Acaffer filled 4 pages. She sat on that low sofa in the cream-colored room and wrote with the focused, disciplined attention of someone who understands that they are receiving something that must be captured exactly as it arrives, not interpreted, not shaped, not filtered through the professional instinct to make sense of things prematurely. Just received, just recorded, just honored with the full accuracy of careful documentation. When Lily finished talking, she leaned her forehead against Rex's shoulder and closed her eyes. The room was quiet for a long time. Dr. Acaffer set her pen down. She looked at the little girl and the dog, the stillness of them together, the particular piece of a child who has put something down that was too heavy for her to carry and has found, in the putting down, not emptiness but relief. She had conducted hundreds of forensic interviews in 22 years. She knew the difference, the absolute, unmistakable difference, between a child who had been told what to say and a child who was remembering what had happened. She knew the markers, the consistency of detail across sessions, the involuntary specificity of sensory memory, the absence of any coached language, the way a true account circles and doubles back and arrives at its most painful points sideways rather than directly, because the mind approaches its deepest wounds the way the body approaches a burn, carefully, obliquely, testing the heat before committing. Everything Lily had said across 3 sessions carried every marker of truth. And none, not one single element, carried the fingerprint of an adult. Dr. Acaffer picked up her pen again. She opened her notepad to a fresh page. She wrote the date, the session number, and a single sentence at the top of the page that she underlined twice. Then she closed the notepad, placed both hands flat on its cover, and sat for a moment in the quiet of the room while the implications of what she had just documented settled fully into place. Tomorrow she would take what she had to the judge. And the man in the charcoal suit would begin to understand that the truth he had buried had been found, not by investigators, not by attorneys, not by any of the professional instruments designed specifically for the purpose of finding it. By a 3-year-old girl and a dog who knew how to listen. There is a particular kind of person who is very good at appearing innocent. Not the nervous kind of innocent, not the wide-eyed protestations of disbelief kind that most people associate with wrongful accusation. That kind is easy to read, easy to sympathize with, easy to verify. The kind of innocent that Gerald Prout was good at appearing was something far more sophisticated and far more dangerous. It was the calm kind, the cooperative kind, the kind that arrives at every interaction with the demeanor of someone who has nothing to hide precisely, because they have spent considerable time and energy ensuring that everything is hidden. He had been doing it for years. Long before Lily, long before Canton, Ohio, long before the house on Delwood Avenue and the custody hearing and the courthouse hallway where a German shepherd had sat down on the floor and listened to the truth that Gerald Prout had been certain no one would ever hear. He had refined it the way people refine any skill they practice consistently, through repetition, through feedback, through the gradual elimination of anything that didn't work and the reinforcement of everything that did. He knew how to cry at the right moments. He knew how to ask questions about the child's well-being that sounded like love and landed like evidence of love, and were, in reality, the performance of love by someone who understood its grammar without possessing any of its substance. He knew how long to hold eye contact and when to break it. He knew that cooperative witnesses who ask clarifying questions seem more credible than cooperative witnesses who simply answer them. He knew that the word devastated lands differently in a sentence than the word upset, and he used the former consistently. He was, in the estimation of the 2 investigators who had interviewed him in the initial weeks following Lily's removal, one of the most plausible people they had encountered in a combined 31 years of investigative work. Detective Angela Marsh had been one of those investigators. She had sat across a table from Gerald Prout on October 3rd, 11 days before the courthouse hallway and Rex, and the 3 words that changed everything. And she had walked away from that interview with the particular unease that experienced investigators carry after an encounter that looks clean but doesn't feel it. She had written in her notes that evening, in the shorthand she used for private assessments that never made it into official reports, a single phrase. Too smooth. 2 words, sitting in a notebook in her desk drawer while the official investigation moved forward on the basis of what could be documented rather than what could be sensed. But Lily's words gave Detective Marsh somewhere new to look. She received Dr. Acaffer's preliminary findings on a Friday morning, a carefully worded document that stopped well short of conclusions but was dense with specific detail, the kind of detail that investigators recognize immediately as the raw material of a case beginning to reveal its true architecture. A broken lamp, a staircase, a voice that changed. Sensory memories described with the involuntary specificity of lived experience. Marsh read it twice, then she made a phone call. Then she drove to Delwood Avenue. She had been to the house before, of course. She had walked through it in the first days of the investigation with the systematic attention that training required, photographing, documenting, nodding. She had seen it as a scene. Now she was returning to see it as a story. There is a difference, and experienced investigators know it. A scene is static. A story has a narrator, and the narrator of this particular story had just provided new details that changed what Marsh was looking for. She stood in the room Lily had described. The lamp was there, lying on its side on a shelf in the far corner, its shade bent at an angle that made it clear it had been dropped or knocked with force and simply left where it fell, not recently, but long enough ago that the dust had settled on it in its broken position, as if the house itself had accepted the damage as permanent. Marsh photographed it from 4 angles. Then she stood very still in the middle of the room and looked at it and thought about a 3-year-old girl who had seen that lamp in that position often enough and under circumstances specific enough that it had become a landmark in her memory. A fixed point in a geography of fear. She moved to the staircase. 3rd step from the bottom. She stood on it, shifted her weight. The creak it produced was specific and distinctive, not the general settling wood sound of an old house, but a particular pitch and duration, the kind of sound that would be instantly recognizable to anyone who had learned to listen for it. The kind of sound that a child learns to listen for when the sound means something important about what comes next. Marsh stood on that 3rd step for a long time. Then she called her partner. Over the following 48 hours, the investigation expanded in ways that the original case file had not anticipated. Marsh and her partner, Detective Roy Thiessen, began working backward through Gerald Pruitt's history, with the methodical patience of investigators who have learned that the most revealing things about a person are usually located not in what they've done most recently, but in the trail they've left behind them over years of movement through the world. The trail, once they knew how to follow it, was not as clean as Gerald Pruitt believed. There had been a previous address, a rented house in a small city 2 hours east of Canton, occupied by Pruitt for 14 months approximately 4 years prior. Marsh located the landlord, a retired contractor named Don Eberly, who remembered his former tenant with the specific, guarded quality of someone who has a story they've been waiting for permission to tell. Don described things. Small things that had accumulated over 14 months into a shape that Don hadn't known what to do with, that didn't constitute anything he could have reported with confidence, that existed in the space between something feeling wrong and something being provably wrong. The space that people like Gerald Pruitt are experts at occupying. He described a child he had seen occasionally in the backyard, a quiet boy, 7 or 8 years old. Don had assumed he was a nephew or a neighbor's kid. He described the way the boy moved, carefully, watchfully, with the particular physical alertness of a child who has learned to read adult body language as a survival skill. Marsh asked Don if he still had the name of the family. He did. The family had moved. It took Thiessen 6 hours of database work to locate them. Now living in a different state, the mother remarried, the boy now 12. Marsh made the call herself, because some calls require a particular quality of patience and steadiness that not every investigator possesses, and she had learned long ago that she was the right person for the ones that mattered most. The boy's name was Nathan. His mother, a woman named Patricia, listened to Marsh's carefully worded opening without interrupting. There was a long silence after Marsh finished. Then Patricia said, very quietly, "I always knew someone would call eventually." And the way she said it, not with relief exactly, but with the exhausted recognition of someone who has been carrying a weight for years and has finally been given permission to set it down, told Marsh everything she needed to know about the direction the next conversation would take. Nathan spoke to a child advocate the following day. Marsh was not present for that conversation. She didn't need to be. The report that came to her afterward contained details that connected to Lily's account with the precision of pieces that were always made for the same puzzle, specific, consistent, corroborating in ways that no coaching or coordination could have produced, because Nathan and Lily had never met and existed in entirely separate chapters of the same ongoing story. A story that Gerald Pruitt had believed was finished, closed, survived. Meanwhile, Thiessen had located a former coworker, a woman named Sandra Kellys who had worked alongside Pruitt at a logistics company 3 years prior, and had filed an internal HR complaint that had been reviewed, deemed inconclusive, and filed away in a folder that no one had opened since. Sandra had not been contacted during the original investigation because no one had thought to look for her. Nobody had known she existed. She existed. She answered Thiessen's call on the second ring. She had been waiting, she said, for approximately 3 years. The picture that assembled itself over those 48 hours was not the picture of a man who had made a terrible mistake in a moment of weakness or failure. It was the picture of a pattern, deliberate, sustained, and carefully managed across years and addresses and relationships, by someone who had learned to identify vulnerability and exploit it and move on before the consequences could assemble themselves into something actionable. Gerald Pruitt had believed that the one thing this pattern required, silence from the people he had hurt, was something he could always maintain, because the people he hurt were always smaller than him, always less powerful, always, by the nature of their circumstances, easier to disbelieve than to believe. He had not accounted for a dog. He had not accounted for the specific, extraordinary capacity of a German shepherd named Rex to create a quality of safety that his victims, specifically, a 3-year-old girl in a yellow cardigan, could not find anywhere else. He had not accounted for the fact that a child who wouldn't speak to a single human being would speak to an animal. That she would whisper 3 words into warm fur that would travel from a courthouse hallway to a witness stand to a detective's notebook, to a prior address to a 12-year-old boy in another state who had been carrying his own version of the same story for years. On the morning of the 4th day of hearings, Gerald Pruitt arrived at the Stark County Courthouse in a charcoal gray suit and a burgundy tie and the composed, cooperative demeanor that had served him so reliably for so long. He walked through the front entrance with his attorney at his side, and his expression calibrated to exactly the right setting, concerned but confident, cooperative but dignified. He reached the second-floor corridor. 2 men in plain clothes were waiting. Detective Angela Marsh stood slightly behind them, her hands in her jacket pockets, her expression carrying the particular quality of stillness that comes not from coldness, but from the satisfaction of a person who has done difficult work well and is now witnessing its completion. Gerald Pruitt looked at the 2 men. He looked at Marsh. Something moved across his face, quick and involuntary, there and gone in less than a second before the composure reasserted itself. But it had been there. Marsh had seen it. She had been watching for it. It was the expression of a man who has been certain, for a very long time, that he has gotten away with something, and who has just, in the space of a single hallway encounter, understood that he hasn't. The charcoal suit and the burgundy tie went into an evidence bag 2 hours later. Gerald Pruitt was escorted from the building in handcuffs, charged with crimes that stretched back years and across state lines, crimes that had been waiting, patient and invisible, for someone to finally pull the right thread. The thread had been pulled by a 3-year-old girl, who had found the courage to pull it by whispering to a dog. The night before the final day of the hearing, Judge Patricia Hale sat alone in her chambers until nearly 11 o'clock. This was not unusual for her. She had been staying late in this building for 19 years, long after the clerks went home, long after the hallways emptied and the marble floors stopped carrying the sound of footsteps, and the building settled into the particular quiet of a place that holds human stories in its walls and breathes them back out in the dark. She had made some of the most significant decisions of her career in this room, at this desk, in the hours when the weight of what she was carrying could be examined without the performance that daylight required. She had a yellow legal pad in front of her, a cup of tea that had gone cold an hour ago. The Monroe case file open to the most recent submissions, Dr. Acker's documented session notes, Detective Marsh's investigative findings, the corroborating testimony that had arrived in the last 48 hours like pieces of a puzzle, finally assembling into an image that was as clear as it was devastating. She read everything twice, then she set the file down and looked at the wall. In 19 years on the family court bench, Judge Hale had presided over cases that had tested her in every dimension a judge can be tested. Cases where the evidence was clear but the right outcome was murky. Cases where the right outcome was clear but the evidence was insufficient. Cases where children had been returned to dangerous situations because the law required it, and she had sat with that for years. Cases where she had gotten it right and cases where she was not certain she had, and the uncertainty lived in her the way all judicial uncertainty lives, quietly, permanently, never fully resolved. This case was different. This case had arrived at clarity through the most unexpected door she had encountered in 19 years, not through expert testimony or forensic evidence or the careful deconstruction of a respondent's credibility under cross-examination, through a little girl and a dog, through a whisper in a hallway, through 3 words spoken by a child who had refused to speak to any human being for 23 days and had found, in the warm fur of a German shepherd, the one thing that all the professional apparatus of child welfare had not been able to provide. Safety, real safety, not managed or manufactured or professionally deployed, but simply felt. Judge Hale picked up her pen. She wrote for 2 hours. Thursday arrived in Canton wrapped in low gray clouds that pressed close to the rooftops and a thin, persistent rain that had been falling since before dawn. The kind of morning that feels like weather and grief occupying the same space, heavy without being dramatic, continuous without being violent. By 7:45 in the morning, there was a line outside the courthouse. Not the usual gathering of attorneys and social workers and the occasional family member who arrived early to claim a seat. This was something different in composition and in quality. People who had read the local paper's account of Deputy Webb's testimony. People who had heard the story through the particular human telegraph of a community responding to something that touches its sense of justice and its sense of childhood simultaneously. People who had no professional stake in the outcome but felt somehow that they needed to be present for it. The public gallery of Courtroom 7 was standing room only by 8:15. Courthouse staff who had been present for every day of the hearing arrived and found colleagues already there, already seated, already speaking in the low, careful voices of people who are holding something they aren't sure how to carry. The court reporter arrived and arranged her equipment with the practiced efficiency of years, and then sat very still for a moment before the session began, her hands in her lap, her eyes on the front of the room. Something was different about this morning. Everyone in that building felt it. Judge Hale made her decision about Lily at 8:43, standing at her chamber's window watching the rain move across the parking lot below. It was not a decision that fit neatly within standard procedure. It was the kind of decision that a judge makes when she has weighed the procedural arguments against the human reality and determined, with the authority of 19 years and the particular moral clarity of a woman who has spent those years in service of children's welfare, that the human reality outweighs the procedure. She called Donna Cartwright. She asked that Lily be brought to the courthouse. She asked specifically that Rex be there. Lily arrived at 9:10 in a navy blue dress with small white flowers that her foster grandmother Margaret had taken her to choose from a shop on Elm Street 2 days prior. It was the first real choice, the first genuine, unconstrained expression of preference that anyone had witnessed from Lily since she entered care, and Margaret had stood in that small shop on Elm Street and watched this child move along a rack of dresses with careful, serious attention, and felt something crack open in her chest that she hadn't known was sealed. Lily had pointed at the navy dress without hesitation. That one, she had said, 2 words clear and certain. Margaret had purchased it immediately and cried in the car on the way home, quietly, where Lily couldn't see. Lily walked into the courthouse that Thursday morning wearing the dress she had chosen herself, her stuffed rabbit under her arm, her pink Velcro sneakers on her feet, both straps fastened correctly, which Donna noticed and which meant something she couldn't have fully articulated but felt precisely. She walked differently than she had the first morning. Not dramatically differently, not with the visible transformation that stories sometimes assign to children who have been through something and come out the other side. It was subtler than that, a quality of presence, of groundedness, as if the 3 sessions in the cream-colored room with Rex had returned to her some portion of the weight she was supposed to carry in her own body rather than bracing against the world's. She still watched everything. Those wide, careful eyes still moved across every space she entered with the observational thoroughness of a child who had learned early that environments contain information essential to safety. But the watching had a different quality now, less like scanning for threat, more like simply seeing. Rex was waiting in the hallway outside Courtroom 7. The moment Lily saw him, she made a sound, small and immediate and entirely involuntary, the sound of recognition and relief arriving simultaneously, and walked toward him with a directness that required no encouragement from any adult. Rex stood up as she approached, and when she reached him, she put both arms around his neck and pressed her face into his fur and held on for a long, quiet moment. Deputy Marcus Webb stood 2 feet away and looked at the ceiling for a second. Just 1 second. Then he looked back down and composed himself in the way that experienced officers do when something hits them somewhere that their training doesn't fully cover. The courtroom filled. The gallery settled into the taut, charged quiet of a crowd that has assembled for something it understands to be significant. Attorneys took their places. The court reporter arranged her hands. The machinery of justice, which had been temporarily redirected by a whisper in a hallway, prepared to deliver its verdict. Judge Hale entered at 9:28. The room rose. She settled into her chair with the deliberate composure of a woman who has decided exactly what she is going to say, and has decided also how she is going to say it. Not with drama, not with the performative weight that lesser judges sometimes bring to significant rulings, but with the plain, unadorned authority of someone who has done the work and arrived at the truth and now simply needs to speak it. Lily sat in a chair beside Deputy Marcus Webb, directly behind the gallery divider, her feet not quite reaching the floor. Rex had settled against her legs from the aisle, his broad, warm side pressed against her calves. Without looking down, without shifting her gaze from the judge's bench, Lily reached down and curled her fingers lightly around Rex's ear. She held it the way children hold things that make them feel anchored. Judge Hale opened the file before her. She began to read. The language of judicial rulings is not beautiful language. It is not designed to move people or to resonate beyond the immediate legal purpose it serves. It is precise and structured and deliberate, built for accuracy rather than impact, and Judge Hale delivered it exactly as it was written, clearly, evenly, without theatrical emphasis or emotional coloring. And yet the courtroom listened with the absolute, suspended attention of people receiving something sacred. Full guardianship of Lily Monroe awarded to maternal grandmother Margaret Ann Monroe of Akron, Ohio, effective immediately. All parental rights of Gerald Prout severed in their entirety. Protective orders issued and immediately enforceable. All relevant findings forwarded to the Stark County District Attorney's Office and to law enforcement agencies in 2 additional states for concurrent criminal proceedings. A formal review of the case's initial investigative process to be conducted and reported within 90 days. Sentence by sentence, clause by clause. The rain kept falling outside the tall windows. The court reporter's fingers moved steadily. The gallery sat in collective stillness, the stillness of people absorbing something in real time before they have had a chance to process it, before the full weight of it has arrived, existing in the suspension between receiving and understanding. When Judge Hale reached the final paragraph of her ruling, the formal language of conclusion, the procedural closing of a case that had opened in a hallway with a whisper, she paused. It was a small pause, a breath's worth, but in the silence of that courtroom it was enormous, a space into which everything that had happened over the preceding weeks seemed to rush and collect. The sessions in the cream-colored room, the lamp on its side, the third step, Nathan's account, Detective Marsh in a corridor with two plainclothes officers, Gerald Pruitt's face in the moment his composure finally failed him. All of it gathered in that single breath of silence. Then Judge Hale closed the file. She looked up from the bench for the first time since she had begun reading, looked up and out across the courtroom, past the attorneys and the gallery and the court reporter and the bailiffs, to the small figure in the navy dress sitting beside a deputy with her hand around a dog's ear. She held that look for 3 full seconds. Then she picked up her gavel. The sound it made when it came down was clean and final, a single, decisive sound that did not echo so much as settle, like something that had been held in suspension for a long time finally coming to rest. And in the half-second of silence that followed, before the gallery exhaled, before the attorneys gathered their papers, before the machinery of the room resumed its motion, Lily Monroe leaned forward in her chair and wrapped both arms around Rex's neck. She didn't cry. She didn't cheer or smile or make any of the sounds that children make when something they have been waiting for finally arrives. She simply held on both small arms around the dog's neck, her face pressed into his fur, her shoulders dropping with the complete, absolute release of a child who has been running for a very long time and has finally, irrevocably, been allowed to stop. Rex didn't move. He accepted her weight and her arms and her silence with the steady, unconditional presence that had defined his relationship with this child from the first moment in the hallway, warm, immovable, asking nothing, holding everything. The courtroom did not erupt. It did not break into applause or noise or any of the dramatic responses that the moment might have invited. Instead, it did something rarer and more powerful. It went completely, entirely, absolutely silent. The journalist in the third row, a woman named Corinne Sells from the Canton Repository, who had covered family court for 11 years, and believed, genuinely, that she had developed a professional distance sufficient to protect her from moments like this one, set her pen down on her notepad and did not pick it up again. The bailiff near the back wall, a 20-year veteran named Officer Dennis Cole, who had stood in this room for thousands of hearings, and prided himself on an impassivity so complete that his colleagues called it a superpower, pressed 2 fingers briefly to his mouth and looked at the floor. In the second row, a social worker named Brenda Torres, who had worked Lily's case from the night of September 21st and had carried the weight of those 23 silent days in her body like a stone, put both hands over her face. Not sobbing, not breaking down, just covering her face with her hands for a moment, in the way that people do when an emotion is too large for a public space but too real to contain entirely. The rain against the windows, Rex breathing steadily, Lily holding on. 3 attorneys who had spent the week on opposite sides of this case stood in different corners of the room and looked, in that moment, at exactly the same thing with exactly the same expression. The expression of people who chose this work because they believed it could produce moments like this one, and who are sometimes, in the best and rarest cases, proven right. Nobody spoke for a very long time. Corinne Sells filed her story at 6:47 that evening. By 9 o'clock, it had been picked up by the Associated Press. By midnight, it was on the front page of 17 newspapers across the country. By Thursday morning, it was everywhere. And an entire nation sat with its coffee and its screens and read about a little girl in a navy dress and a dog with amber eyes, and a courtroom that had gone completely silent, and felt something shift in its chest that it recognized, even if it couldn't name it precisely, as the particular and irreplaceable feeling of justice arriving exactly when and where and how it was needed most.